He was a man who once believed in God. He prayed, he waited, and for years he asked the same question that lives inside so many of us. Why me? Why must some lives be built from sorrow while others seem kissed by light? Why do prayers echo into silence, and why does the heart keep hoping when every sign says it shouldn't? They say time heals everything, but time had done nothing for him, only hollowed the spaces inside, until faith itself felt like a wound that refused to close. And so one night he decided to do what no one else had dared, to reach beyond the silence. He built a machine, not to prove God existed, but to hear him, to demand an answer. He sent his question into the endless dark, but what came back was not what he expected, because something else was listening, something ancient, something that spoke in light instead of words. 3 beings arrived that night, not to deny God, but to reveal what humanity had always misunderstood about him. What they showed him would unravel every idea he'd ever held about life, pain, and the divine itself. This is not just a story about a man and a machine. It's a story about what answered, and what those beings revealed might change the way you see God. Welcome to Stories Beyond Sight. If this story touches something deep within you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share so others can witness what waits beyond the scene. Now, take a breath, open your heart, and let's begin. Mary, if you're real, you have to answer me now. Michael's voice barely rose above a whisper, but it carried the weight of 12 years. He wasn't talking to her. Not really. He was talking through her, to whatever might still be listening beyond. His hands trembled as he placed the small metal device on the table beside her bed. The machine hummed faintly, a low vibration that seemed to settle into the walls themselves. I built this to reach you, God, to ask you why. Why her? Why me? Why all of it? He stopped, his throat tightening. The rest of the words stayed locked inside, too heavy to speak aloud. The room was small and dim, lit only by a single lamp in the corner and the soft glow of medical monitors. The air smelled of lavender soap and antiseptic, a combination that had become as familiar to Michael as his own breathing. Mary lay on the bed, her chest rising and falling in the same steady rhythm it had maintained for 4,380 days. 12 years. 12 years since the accident that took her mind but left her body behind. 12 years of machines keeping her alive, of one-sided conversations, of hope slowly dissolving into something closer to grief. She looked peaceful, her face smooth, her silver-streaked hair brushed back gently. But peace, Michael had learned, was just another word for absence. This was the woman he loved more than his own life, the woman who had pulled him out of darkness and taught him what it meant to be seen. She had been a nurse, strong, warm, endlessly patient. She used to hum while cooking breakfast, used to leave little notes in his lunchbox with hearts drawn in the corners. She used to hold his hand during thunderstorms because somehow she always knew that loud noises still frightened him, even as a grown man. Now she was a body suspended between 2 worlds, kept alive by tubes and electricity. The doctors called it a miracle that she survived the crash. Michael thought it was cruelty disguised as mercy. He sat down in the chair beside her bed, the same chair he'd sat in every night for 12 years, and took her hand. Her fingers were warm, soft, alive in every way except the one that mattered. I don't know if you can hear me, he said quietly, but I hope you can, because tonight I'm going to find out if any of this means anything. He looked at the machine, its amber light pulsing like a slow heartbeat. If God is real, he owes us an answer. Michael hadn't always been a man who questioned God. For most of his life, he simply didn't think about him at all. God was for people who needed comfort, and Michael had learned early that comfort was a luxury he couldn't afford. He was born in a town too small to matter, a scatter of houses pressed between flat prairie and empty sky. His real father left before Michael could form a memory of his face. His mother remarried when he was 6, a man named Frank who drank from morning until night and saw children as obstacles rather than blessings. Frank didn't want Michael. He made that clear in 1,000 small cruelties. The way he ignored him at dinner, the way he called him the spare or the mistake, the way his hand would lash out when Michael made too much noise. Michael learned quickly to be invisible, to move through rooms like a shadow, to make himself so small that maybe, just maybe, he'd be forgotten instead of hurt. When his mother had another baby, a son Frank actually wanted, Michael became less than invisible. He became leftovers, something to be tolerated until it could be thrown away. His mother never hit him. She just stopped seeing him, stopped asking if he was hungry, stopped noticing when he wore the same clothes for days. Her love, whatever little there had been, transferred entirely to the new baby. Michael understood. He didn't blame her. You protect what you can, and she had chosen to protect the child who had a chance. He was 10 years old the night they died. They'd been at a bar 2 towns over, celebrating something Michael was never told about. The drive back was dark, the road slick with winter rain. Frank never believed in driving slow. The car hit a patch of ice, spun off the highway, and wrapped itself around a tree so hard that the metal frame folded like paper. A sheriff's deputy came to the house the next morning. Michael had been eating cereal in the kitchen alone, the way he always did. The deputy took off his hat and crouched down to Michael's eye level. "I'm real sorry, son," he said. "Your folks didn't make it." Michael remembered nodding, remembered the sound of his spoon scraping the bottom of the bowl, remembered thinking in some distant part of his mind that he wasn't sure if what he felt was sadness or relief. After that came the foster homes. 3 different houses in 4 years. Gray walls, shared bedrooms, other forgotten children who had learned the same survival skills he had. Nobody wanted a quiet boy who didn't smile, who didn't play, who spent his time taking apart broken radios and old clocks just to see how they worked. But it was in those broken things that Michael found something resembling peace from it. Machines made sense. They had rules. If a wire was loose, you tightened it. If a component burned out, you replaced it. Machines didn't lie. They didn't pretend to love you and then forget you existed. They were honest in a way people never were. By the time he turned 18, Michael had taught himself more about engineering than most college graduates knew. He got a job at a manufacturing plant outside Denver, fixing industrial machines, keeping systems running. He was good at it. Reliable, quiet, the kind of employee people forgot about until something broke. He lived alone in a small apartment with a bed, a television, and a workbench. He didn't date, didn't go to bars, didn't believe in love or gain or anything that required faith. Faith, he'd learned, was just hope with a different name, and hope was for people who hadn't been disappointed enough yet. He was 29 when Mary entered his life, not as a spark, but as light after years of gray. She didn't arrive with noise or surprise, just quiet warmth that slipped into the empty places he'd long stopped noticing. For the first time, someone saw him. Not the silence, not the work, but the man beneath both. Mary was the first person who made him believe he could be good. She had a way of listening that made his words feel like they mattered, even when he barely spoke. Her faith wasn't loud or heavy. It was steady, the kind that lived in small gestures. She believed every moment held meaning, and somehow she taught him to believe the same. With her, Michael learned what it meant to be chosen. The nights stopped feeling long. The house stopped echoing. They built a rhythm that was quiet but full. Dinners where laughter replaced prayer. Mornings that began with shared coffee instead of alarms. She was warmth where there had only been noise, and patience where there had been punishment. They talked about their future like it was a promise carved into time. The garden she wanted behind the house, the road trips to the mountains they never quite took, the small cabin near the river he swore he'd build one day when work slowed and life finally let them breathe. She kept notebooks filled with plans and ideas, small dreams that felt infinite because they shared them. Mary gave him something he didn't know how to name, not just love, but belonging. For a man who had spent his whole life unseen, she became proof that he existed. And in her presence, Michael finally stopped feeling like a leftover piece of someone else's story. And then, 12 years ago, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, everything ended. Mary had been driving home from the grocery store. A truck driver fell asleep at the wheel. The truck crossed the median and hit her car head-on at 60 miles an hour. The doctor said it was a miracle she survived. Her heart kept beating, her lungs kept breathing. But wherever her mind had been, wherever the part of her that laughed and hummed and loved, it didn't come back. Michael spent 63 days at the hospital, sitting beside her bed, talking to her, begging her to wake up. The doctors said she might be able to hear him, or she might not. They didn't know. Nobody knew. When the insurance money ran out, he brought her home. He converted the guest bedroom into a medical room, bought equipment, learned how to operate feeding tubes and IV lines. He learned how to turn her every few hours to prevent bed sores, how to clean her, how to keep her alive. Daniel tried to visit, for a while, but watching his mother trapped in a body that wouldn't wake, it broke something in him. He stopped coming after the first year. The last message Michael received from his son was short and final. "I can't do this anymore, Dad. I'm sorry." After that, silence. 12 years of silence, 12 years of waking up every morning and wondering if today would be different. 12 years of talking to someone who couldn't answer. 12 years of love with nowhere to go. And somewhere in those 12 years, Michael's quiet acceptance turned into something sharper, something that demanded an answer. If God existed, if he was real and listening, then he had to explain this. He had to explain why he'd built Michael's entire life out of loss, why he'd given him love just long enough for him to understand what losing it would feel like, why he'd trapped Mary in this terrible in-between place, neither alive nor dead, just suspended. Michael needed to know, so he built a machine to ask. The idea came to him in the middle of the night, sitting beside Mary's bed, staring at the monitors that tracked her heartbeat. Everything in the room ran on electricity, everything hummed with energy, and he thought, what if everything is energy? He'd read once that all matter vibrates at different frequencies. Atoms, light, sound, everything in the universe moved in waves. Even thoughts, some scientists believed, were electrical impulses firing across neurons. What if God was the same? Not a person sitting on a throne somewhere beyond the clouds, but a frequency, a vibration that existed everywhere, in everything, waiting to be tuned into like a radio station? It sounded insane, but Michael had spent his whole life working with frequencies, radio waves, electrical signals, transmissions sent across invisible distances. If God was out there, maybe he could be reached the same way. So Michael started building. He scavenged parts from old radios, satellite dishes, circuit boards pulled from forgotten machines. He worked in the garage every night after caring for Mary, soldering wires, calibrating frequencies, adjusting signal ranges. It took him 8 months to finish. The machine was small, no bigger than a lunchbox, but it was precise. A transmitter designed to send a specific frequency out into the open sky. A frequency that, if his theory was right, might reach beyond the physical world into whatever lay on the other side. It was desperate, impossible, but it was all he had left. Tonight was the night. Michael stood in the garage as twilight faded into darkness. The machine sat on the workbench, its metal surface polished clean, a small antenna extending toward the sky. He ran his hand across it one last time, checking connections, making sure everything was ready. He walked back into the house, past the kitchen where Mary used to hum, past the photographs on the wall. Mary laughing, Daniel as a baby, the three of them together in a world that no longer existed. He stopped in the doorway of her room. "I'm turning it on tonight," he said quietly. "If this works, if he answers, maybe I'll finally understand why." He kissed her forehead, his lips lingering for a moment. "I love you, Mary." I never stopped. Then he walked back outside into the cool Colorado night. The sky stretched endless and black above him, stars scattered like dust across glass. Michael turned on the machine. It hummed, low and steady, a vibration that seemed to sink into the earth itself. The small screen flickered to life, showing the signal climbing, reaching outward into the void. Michael stood there, hands in his pockets, staring up at the stars. "All right," he whispered. "I'm listening." For a long time, nothing happened. Just the hum of the machine, Just the wind moving through the empty land. Just the silence of a world that had stopped answering him years ago. Then, static. A sharp crackle from the small speaker. Michael stepped closer. The signal spiked. The air pressure shifted, dropping like the moment before a storm breaks. And then the darkness began to glow. Faint at first, blue light spilling from nowhere, bending and folding like water flowing upward. It gathered, condensed, took shape. 3 figures stepped forward from the light itself. They were small, no taller than the height of a child, but the feeling that entered with them was vast. Their bodies were not entirely bodies, more like forms the light had agreed to wear for a while. Blue-white veins moved under their translucent skin, slow and tidal, as if thought itself was a current you could see. Where feet should have met the ground, there was only a soft distortion, as if they were standing in both places at once, the yard and something slightly to the side of it. Michael didn't run. Every instinct told him to, but the larger instinct, the one that had kept him sitting beside a bed for 12 years, held him in place. He swallowed and heard himself say, Are you God?" The answer arrived without crossing the air. It found him from the inside, as familiar as his own voice and as strange as a language he'd never studied. "We are not what you name God." The one in front tilted its head. In its black, reflective eyes, the night gathered and steadied. "But you reached a field we inhabit. Your signal brushed it like wind through tall grass. We came because the grass bent too far." Michael looked down at the device on the table, his lunchbox machine with its small antenna pointed at the stars. The amber LED throbbed like a slow heart. His hand hovered over the switch. "I didn't mean to break anything." "You did not break," said a second, its timbre softer, like rain on a tin roof. "You stirred. Stirring is not harm. But if you continue to push without listening, the fabric frays." Michael clicked the machine off. The yard's hum sank. The stars did not move, but they felt closer. "I wasn't trying to reach you," he said, and already the words sounded less certain in his mouth. "I was calling God." "And so you did," said the first. "All reaching reaches. The name you call is a door in your own house." He shook his head, anger and relief and exhaustion arriving all at once, like weather breaking in 3 directions. "I don't care about doors. I need an answer. He owes me one." The third being, smaller than the others, its veins pulsing a shade more blue than white, looked past him, through the kitchen window, toward the hallway that led to Mary's room. Its light dimmed as if in reverence. "There is someone here you love." "My wife," he said. The word still frightened him. She's not gone, but she's not here. I made this machine because I thought if there's a frequency for everything, if God is anything, it would have to answer when I sent the call. I wanted to ask why the life I got, why the child I was, why the man I became, and why." He stopped and breathed like a man who'd forgotten how. Why he left her like this. The first being stepped closer. Its light was steady, patient. "We will not argue with your pain. We will not call it incorrect. We will show it where to stand." "I don't want a lesson," Michael said, and he heard the crack in his voice. "I want an answer." "Then we begin where you are." A thin tone rose in the yard, too soft to be sound and too clear to be ignored. The machines inside the house answered without noise. Mary's monitor found the note and held it. The air felt warmer and then cooler and then exactly right. "We are 3, said the first. "You may name us if your mind needs handles." It looked to the others. "We speak in chords. One will hold clarity, one will carry care, one will anchor form." Michael frowned slightly. "Handles," he repeated, as if testing the word in his mouth. "You mean names?" "Names are how you hold what is larger than words," the first replied. "If it helps, use them. Call us as you need to." He hesitated, the corner of his mouth twitching with something almost like a laugh, the kind that escapes when the mind can't decide whether to fear or marvel. "Fine," he said softly. "You, clarity. He nodded to the first. You care. His eyes moved to the second. And you, Anchor. The smallest one brightened at the last word, as if gratitude were a light you could switch on. We will answer to those, said the one now called Clarity. Not because they define us, but because they make it easier for you to hear. Tell me, Michael said, and now the room behind his eyes felt like a place built for listening. What is God? Clarity did not rush. You count waves on an ocean. God is the sea that lets waves happen. It let the silence hold that shape. You build houses from timber. God is the forest that forgives the timber. You build your life from moments. God is the field that lets moments exist and remain held even when the form changes. God is not elsewhere. God is the nearness that makes elsewhere possible. Michael closed his eyes. He saw Mary laughing in their kitchen with flour on her hands. He saw her legs on the couch, tucked under a blanket in winter. He saw the white hospital light that had never warmed. If he's that close, why can't I hear him? He asked. Care's light met him softly. Because you learned to listen through alarm. You made yourself small to survive. Small listening catches threats well. It does not catch love. You want me to pray, he said, a trace of bitterness at his tongue. I tried that when I was a boy. It felt like talking to drywall. Prayer is not speaking to persuade a distant ruler, said Clarity. It is the act of letting your inner noise rest until the music behind it can be heard. The teacher you called Jesus said, the kingdom is within. He meant the field you keep searching outside lives already in your marrow. Michael held still, the way you do when a deer steps into a clearing and you don't want to ruin the miracle by naming it too fast. If the field is everywhere, why was it what it was? Anchor answered for the first time. Its voice was quiet but exact. Because the field lets freedom be real. Freedom grows love. Love gives itself as care. Care sometimes takes the form of staying through what hurts until the hurt learns how to loosen. This is not punishment. It is what a seed feels when it splits. I am not a seed, he said, and his laugh was a thin thing that didn't know whether to live or not. I'm a man whose wife is in bed down the hall. Yes, said Care, and love has not stopped moving between you. You only think love is the same as the form it uses. The form changed. Love didn't. He looked back at the kitchen window. The hallway light fell like a small river across tile. You talk in metaphors. Clarity inclined its head. We talk in what your mind can hold without closing. Then show me, he said, the words before the thought. No more sentences. Show me what you mean. The trio did not turn away. They seemed to agree. An agreement here was a brightening that moved between them in a triangled path. The yard did not glow. It remembered how to be awake. The air drew a slow breath. The stars swam closer. Stand still, said Anchor, and let us tune the room. A thin film of tremor passed through the night like wind choosing a new tree to move. Michael felt it in the bones behind his ears. It was not a sound so much as something sound had been made to resemble. The porch light dimmed without turning off. The machine on the table, though silent, warmed as if it recognized a cousin's voice. The yard unfolded. At least that was how it felt. The space did not get larger. It became as large as it had always been without the blindness that made it seem small. Above, beneath, behind, a lattice of brightness revealed itself. Not bright like neon, bright like memory. Lines met lines, nodes pulsed without hurry. Within that mesh, things lived. Shapes like people and not like people, each one a tone, each tone a color, each color a gesture of meaning. Michael's knees forgot how to hold him. He leaned back against the railing, which was suddenly a kindness and not a board. What is this? He said, but his voice had become so quiet that the question didn't even bump the moment. This is the field, said Clarity. Not our place or yours, the nearness that holds both. Your device tugged its threads. We followed the pull. Care, standing nearest the kitchen window, raised a hand. The lattice around the house drew closer, like a map zooming in. In its lines, Michael saw rooms of their life: the hospital corridor with its blemished paint, the diner where she'd drawn hearts on napkins, the aisle of a hardware store where he'd helped a stranger find the right bolt and walked away before receiving thanks. Each image flickered, not like a film, but like a presence that had never actually left. "These are memories," he said. "Not pictures of where you were," Care answered, "but the shape those moments still made in the field when their form stopped." Clarity moved its hand through the mesh, and it parted like tall grass letting a child pass. At the center, a deeper brightness waited. It was not a point. It was like a note that survived even when the instrument was put away. This is what you mean when you say soul. It is not separate from the field. It is a way the field holds the song you are faithfully even when the instrument goes quiet for a time. Michael swallowed. "And Mary's?" Anchor looked toward the hall again. Its veins slowed their glimmer as if to match the room across the house. "She is here, not only in the bed. She fluctuates between forms. The brain is resting. The song is not." He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes until stars jumped on the inside, then it dropped them and looked at the outside ones instead. "If her song is still there," he said, "why can't I hear it?" "Because you listen only with the part of you that expects the instrument," Clarity said. "Her instrument is set down for now. The music remains in the field that holds you both. Learn to listen there." He didn't know how to hate what they were saying. He didn't know how to love it either. He only knew he wasn't being argued with. He wasn't being sold. He was being shown. "What do I do?" he asked. "If God is a field and love is a song and everything is this mesh, what does a man do in a small house with a woman who won't wake up?" Care stepped close enough that the edges of its light met the cuff of his sleeve and stopped there, polite. "You do what love does when it is prevented from moving in the old ways. You let it find the new ones. You give the love you still have a way to travel." "To who?" he asked, and the question made him feel both younger and older than he had ever been. "She can't hear me." "You are certain of that, or weary of not knowing?" Care did not accuse. It invited. He closed his eyes again. In the hospital on the 40th day, he had said a whole day's worth of sentences and left with the kind of silence that mocked you for trying. If the field had been in that room, he had not known where to look. "How do I try again?" he said, without breaking the part that finally learned to stop hoping. Anchor answered, "By not mistaking hoping for waiting, and by not mistaking love for bargaining." It let that settle. Hope says, "If you do this, I will believe." Love says, "Even if nothing changes, I will be the kind of presence I would want beside me if this were mine." Michael stared at the beings for a long moment, then spoke quietly, almost to himself. "You're saying I've been bargaining this whole time. 12 years of keeping her alive, thinking if I was faithful enough, patient enough." "Not bargaining," Care interrupted gently. "Loving, but with the weight of an unspoken contract. Remove the contract. Keep the love." "How?" The word came out raw. "How do I love something I can't hold, can't talk to, can't—" He stopped, his voice threatening to break. Clarity's light pulsed once, slowly. "You already know. You have touched metal with reverence for decades. You speak to machines as if they contain the sacred. This is because you understand attention is the first language. Before words, before touch, there is the act of turning toward. That is prayer. That is love's beginning." Michael looked at his hands, calloused, oil-stained even after washing. The hands of a man who'd spent his life fixing things that could be fixed. "I don't know how to fix her." "Then stop fixing," said Anchor, "and start attending." The words sat in the air like a key he'd been searching for in the wrong drawer. Attending, not repairing, not bargaining, just being present to what was. "I'm afraid," he said, and the admission surprised him. "I'm afraid that if I stop trying to bring her back, I'm giving up on her." Care moved closer, and its light felt less like illumination and more like the warmth that comes from sitting near someone who understands what silence costs. "Giving up is turning away. What we ask is that you turn toward what is actually here, not what you wish were here. She is not absent. She is in a form you have not learned to recognize. Then teach me, Michael said. Please, teach me how to see her. Clarity raised both hands and the lattice brightened until the entire yard seemed to breathe with light. The threads between the nodes thickened, became more visible, and Michael saw something he hadn't noticed before. Thin golden lines connecting his chest to the house, specifically to the room where Mary lay. These are the threads of continuous care, Clarity said. Every time you fed her, turned her, cleaned her, spoke to her even when you believed she couldn't hear, you were weaving these. They do not break when form changes. They adjust. Michael watched the golden threads pulse in time with his own heartbeat. So I haven't been wasting my time? Time cannot be wasted when it is given as care, said Anchor. But it can be burdened with expectation. You have kept her alive. Now learn to let her be alive in the way she is, not the way she was. He felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he'd been tying tighter for 12 years. I don't know if I can accept that. The way she is now, it's not life, it's just existence. Is it? Care's voice was soft but firm. Her heart beats without machines. Her lungs breathe. Her body heals small wounds. Her hair grows. Her cells replace themselves. This is not the work of existence. This is life insisting on itself, even when the mind cannot participate in the usual ways. But she's not conscious. She's not present. Clarity's head tilted. Consciousness is not an on-off switch. It is a spectrum, a river that sometimes runs underground. Just because you cannot see the water does not mean it has stopped moving. Michael felt his throat tighten. He wanted to argue, to push back against the comfort they were offering, because comfort felt like a betrayal of his grief. But he was also tired, so tired of carrying the weight of her absence like a stone in his chest. Show me something else, Verdi said finally. Show me why suffering exists at all. If God is this field, this nearness, why does it allow pain? Why does it let children get hurt? Why did it let Mary's car get hit by a truck driven by a man who fell asleep? The three beings were quiet for a moment, and in that silence, Michael felt the weight of his questions settle like snow. Anchor spoke first. Suffering is not designed, it is not inflicted by a hand in the sky. It is what happens when form meets form without harmony. The truck driver was exhausted. His body needed rest. His mind insisted on pushing. These are two forms in conflict. Your wife's car was in a place. The truck was in a place. The field does not intervene in the meeting of forms. It only holds what results. That's not an answer, Michael said, his voice harder now. That's just physics. I'm asking why a loving God would build a world where physics can destroy people. Care stepped forward. Because love without freedom is control, and control without choice is prison. The field gives all forms freedom to move, to choose, to exist. Sometimes those freedoms intersect in ways that cause harm. This is not cruelty. This is the cost of a world where choice is real. So God just watches? Doesn't care. God is not separate from the watching, Clarity said. God is the awareness in which all things happen. When you suffered as a child, the field did not abandon you. It held you. It was the ground beneath your feet when your stepfather's hand fell. It was the air you breathed when you cried alone. It was the quiet that remained when the noise finally stopped. That quiet is not indifference. It is the deepest form of presence. Michael's hands clenched into fists. Presence isn't enough. A child needs protection, not presence. And where did you find the strength to survive? Anchor asked. Where did the part of you that refused to break come from? He opened his mouth to answer and found he didn't have one. He'd never thought about it that way. He'd always assumed his survival was just stubbornness, luck, the random chance of a personality that happened to be resilient. You survive because the field does not only hold, said Care. It also nourishes. It gives you the strength to meet what comes, not by removing the difficulty, but by deepening the capacity to bear it. This is not cruelty. This is how a soul learns its own size. I didn't want to learn my own size, Michael said quietly. I wanted a father who didn't hurt me. I wanted a mother who saw me. I wanted a wife who could wake up. We know, said Clarity, and for the first time its voice carried something that sounded almost like sorrow. The field knows. Every grief you carry is known. Every tear you have swallowed is recorded in the lattice. You are not unseen. You have never been unseen. Michael looked up at the stars, at the infinite scatter of light that suddenly felt less cold and more like witnessing. If I'm not unseen, he said, then why does it feel like I am? Because you learned to see yourself through the eyes of people who could not see, Care said. Your stepfather saw you as an obstacle. Your mother saw you as a burden. These were their failures, not your truth, but you took their sight as your own and believed the story they told about your worth. He swallowed hard. How do I stop believing that story? By remembering the ones who saw you clearly, said Anchor. Mary saw you, your son saw you until grief made him look away. Even now in your work, in the way you care for small machines, you see yourself, you treat broken things with reverence. This is because you know what it is to be broken and to survive. That knowing is a form of love. The words settled into him like seeds in tilled soil. He didn't know if they would grow, but he could feel them taking root. All right, he said, his voice steadier now. If suffering is the cost of freedom, and if the field holds everything, what's the point? Why exist at all if existence comes with this much pain? Clarity's light brightened, and the lattice above them seemed to hum with a frequency just below hearing. Because between the suffering, there are moments when form and field align so perfectly that you taste what you truly are. You call these moments buoyant love, beauty, grace. They are brief because form is always shifting, but they are real, and they are the point. Brief isn't enough, Michael said. Brief is what makes them matter, said Care. If joy lasted forever, it would become baseline. You would not notice it. You would not treasure it. The impermanence of form is not a flaw. It is what makes each moment irreplaceable. Michael thought of Mary's laugh, the way it used to fill a room and then vanish, leaving only the memory of warmth. He'd give anything to hear it again. But he also knew that if he'd heard it every day for eternity, he might have stopped listening. You're saying I should be grateful for what I lost because losing it taught me to appreciate it? No, Anchor said firmly. We are saying that loss is not the final word. Form ends. The song does not. What you experienced with Mary, the love, the partnership, the way she taught you to be gentle, those are not locked in the past. They are woven into the field. They are part of what you carry, not as memory alone, but as a living thread that still connects you. Michael felt his chest tighten again, but this time it wasn't grief. It was something closer to recognition. So when I sit with her now, even though she can't respond, I'm still connected to her. You were never disconnected, said Clarity. You only believed you were because the form of connection changed. Learn the new form. This is what we are here to teach. He nodded slowly. The resistance in him was loosening, like a muscle that had been clenched for so long it forgot it could relax. Okay, he said, teach me. The beings moved in unison, a slow, graceful turn toward the house. The lattice followed them, wrapping the structure in threads of light that pulsed like breath. Wait, Michael said. Before we go inside, I need to ask you something else. They stopped. Care turned first, its light warm and patient. Time, Michael said. Why does time feel so cruel? 12 years is nothing to the universe, but it's everything to me. It's my 50s gone. It's my son's 20s and 30s. It's Mary's entire middle age erased. Why does time take so much? Clarity moved closer. Time does not take. Time allows. It is the medium through which form can change. Without time, there is no growth, no healing, no possibility of transformation. You see time as an enemy because you are using it to measure loss. But time is also what gave you every moment you treasure. It gave you the morning Mary said yes. It gave you the hour your son was born. It gave you the years you spent learning to trust that love was real. But it also gave me the years of watching her disappear, Michael said. Yes, said Anchor. Because time does not choose sides. It is the neutral ground on which all things happen. Your grief is that you want to keep what time has moved past. This is natural, this is human, but it is also suffering. So what do I do? Just let go? No, Care said gently. You hold differently. You stop gripping what cannot be held and start attending to what is. Mary's body is still here. Your love is still here. The field that holds you both is still here. These are not small things. Michael looked at the house, at the soft glow of the lamp in Mary's window. 12 years he'd been walking in and out of that room, and he'd never once thought of it as anything other than a prison. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just a room where love was learning a new shape. All right, and he said, and show me how to attend. I don't know if I can do this, Michael said, hesitating at the threshold of Mary's room. The three beings waited behind him, their light casting soft shadows that didn't quite behave like shadows should. You have been doing this for 12 years, said Anchor. Tonight you simply do it with awareness instead of obligation. He stepped inside. The room smelled the same, lavender and antiseptic, but somehow it felt different. The air was warmer. The hum of the machine seemed less like an intrusion and more like a rhythm the house had learned to breathe with. Mary lay in the bed, her chest rising and falling, silver hair spread across the pillow. Her face was smooth, peaceful, the face of someone dreaming without end. Hey, he said, and suddenly he could only speak as if she were in the next room and had always been. I turned the thing on. It worked, but not how I thought. We have visitors. You would like them. He smiled without thinking. They don't waste words. Clarity stood near the monitor and watched the green line with the care of an artist, regarding a canvas that contained a human being's ordinary day. Anchor moved toward the far corner and placed its hands an inch apart, drawing the room's invisible threads a degree tighter, like someone tuning a guitar by ear in a quiet house. Care took up a place by the headboard and let its light settle like dawn under curtains. Remember the list you kept, Michael said. Cabin by the river. You said you wanted the windows to show the sky when you made coffee. You wrote, finally learned to like jazz, and underlined it twice and then never tried it. You said we should drive to the orchard every October and bring back a ridiculous number of apples, and then complain about peeling them, and then make pie for neighbors we didn't even know the last names of. He breathed. The room did too. The garden, he said. You wanted tomatoes and mint because you said mint makes a yard kind to tired people. I didn't understand what you meant. I think I do now. Clarity watched his face and said, without voice, you are not bribing God. You are remembering love out loud so it has roads. Michael let the words pass like weather and kept talking. He did not hurry. He did not hold back. He told a story about their son refusing to wear shoes for an entire summer and how proud Mary had been of his certainty even while telling him to put them on. He told her the blue mug still chipped in the same place and he had never thrown it away because the chip made the coffee taste more like mornings next to her. He described the exact shape of the shadow the maple made across the living room wall at 4:15 on early autumn afternoons and how she had once watched it move for an hour and called it quiet theater. Anchor stood at the foot of the bed and slowly opened one hand. The air around Michael made a small sound, what breath might sound like if it were a bell. The lattice he had seen in the yard lifted again, faint, superimposed, this time only in this room, and he saw a thin path between his hand and hers, not a cord, not a leash, something like a bridge of tiny notes that didn't know how to be anything but kindness. Care said, enough for tonight. Not to shut him down, not to take the good away, to keep good from being used like a weapon against tiredness. He nodded. Okay, he told Mary. I'll be back in the morning. He realized that was the first time in a long time he'd said morning as if it were a gift and not an enemy. He stood. He looked at the beings. What now? Clarity said, now you send a sentence to your son. He took out his phone as if it might refuse and needed to learn it didn't have to. He typed, Dan, thinking of you tonight. Your mom's hair is silver now. It's beautiful. No need to reply. Just wanted you to know I'm here. He hovered over send. He looked at Mary. He pressed his thumb. Anchor tilted its head, the way nurses do when they check a drip without looking like they are judging the rate. And for me, he asked. Care gestured toward the hallway. Tea, 10 minutes in the dark. Sit as if you were keeping a friend company. When your mind runs, let it. When it rolls over and sleeps at your feet, let it. That is prayer enough. He made the tea. He didn't turn on the lamp in the living room. He sat, not to perform a stillness, but to permit it. Thoughts came like busy relatives who spoke too loud and had to be allowed to finish their sentence before anyone could rest. They did. He let them. The room softened until it was a place a person might actually want to be. The phone vibrated. He did not lunge. He breathed once and then looked. Thanks for the message, Dad. He exhaled a sound he had not made since the week after the accident. It wasn't a sob. It was what you do when a window you thought was painted shut opens and the air is ordinary and miraculous at once. He stood and returned to the guest room. The beings had not moved, but the room felt different in the exact way a lake feels different after someone has walked along its edge and not thrown anything in. Clarity pointed, not with a finger but with attention, at the machine on the table by the bed, the small lunchbox transmitter he had set down earlier. May we borrow your device? Asked Clarity. He frowned. I thought you wanted it off. Off to push, on to listen, Clarity said. We will adjust it to receive the field you call within. You built it to shout up. We will show you how to let it lean down. Anchor reached toward the machine without touching it. The amber LED pulsed a fraction faster. Care placed both hands open in the air 2 inches above Mary's sternum, not touching, and the room knew the difference between reverence and performance. Clarity guided him. Turn the dial a breath to the left. Now pause. Feel, do not measure. Another breath, stop. A tone no ear could have picked out found the center of the machine. The speaker did not emit sound. It released a hush so complete that for a moment it felt like relief had volume. On the little screen where numbers had marched numbers, a slow wave traced itself, up, down, rest, up, down, rest. What is that? He whispered. The room's nearness to itself, said Clarity. The field inaudible, made friendly to your tools. When Mary's body changes state, even by one pedal on one unnoticed nerve, the room's wave will move, not to prove, to teach you where listening belongs. He watched the line as if it might give him permission to hope without embarrassment. Care dropped its hands. The line steadied. Anchor lowered its arm. The thin bell sound exhaled from the air and went someplace healthy. Michael rubbed his face. You're staying, he said. Not a question. We are not leaving, Anchor said. Not yet. He nodded. Then I want to ask you something else, not about Mary, about the boy I used to be. I hate him sometimes for being so hungry, for wanting what wasn't given, for still wanting it at 57. He looked at his hands. I hate him for being me. Care's light moved like comfort you could sit in. Forgive him by letting him exist. He learned to watch people's faces for danger instead of welcome. He learned to map rooms by where not to stand. Those maps saved him. Thank him. Then walk him to the window and show him there is a yard. Clarity added, Jesus called that yard the kingdom, not after death, present. Here, the place in you that isn't frightened by your own life. Michael stared at Mary's palm, lines crossing lines, roads meeting roads. He placed 2 fingers in the center of her hand the way he used to when he wanted to make her laugh, by pretending to read fortunes. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The machine's wave rose a fraction, not a miracle, not a headline, a pedal and a nerve, and a room that remembered to be kind. He did not cry. He rested inside the crying he had been doing for years, without letting his face join in. He stood, not because he was finished, but because the house felt like it wanted the rhythm of moving again. Tomorrow, he said to the beings, I'll read to her the garden list, the jazz she never learned to like. He smiled. I'll play the first track of something terrible and tell her I blame you. Care almost laughed the way a person would. Blame us. We will permit it. He turned toward the door and then looked back at them, surprised by a thought that arrived wearing gratitude like an old sweater. Will you show me sometime, not now, what comes after form? Not heaven and hell, and all the words that made me more afraid. Just what the song does when the instrument sleeps. Clarity did not promise and did not refuse. We will give you a glimpse that helps you be a man who can sit in a room and love what is in it. That is the only honest reason for glimpses. He accepted that. It did not feel like being denied. It felt like being kept safe from the drug of spectacle. Night stretched. He walked the hall to the kitchen and washed a single mug and put it on the rack like someone who believed there would be coffee again. He turned off the porch light and left the yard to the stars. He came back to the room and took the chair and rested his feet flat and watched the line rise and fall and thought, this is the first conversation we've had in years where I remembered to listen. The beings didn't dim. They were not candles to spend. They were a nearness that made sense beside his sense. Clarity watched the wave. Care watched Mary's face. Anchor watched the door, as if keeping the threshold reminded thresholds how to be generous. Michael spoke once more, and the sentence found its place without effort. If you are messengers, he said, then tell whoever sent you this. I'm not angry the way I was. I'm present. I don't know how long it will last, but I'm here. The machine did not cheer. It eased. The room did not glow. It agreed. Mary's breath went in. It went out. Somewhere, a memory he had not allowed himself to visit, the river cabin, windows open to skybound, sat down in the front pew of his imagination and waited without pressure for someone to build it. At the edge of his hearing, the aliens spoke together, their voices braided like three notes that were not competing for the same space. This is the work, to keep company with what you love, without demanding it change form to prove it's real. He nodded. A person could spend an hour learning how to do that and the rest of a life practicing. They did not depart. Their presence did not thin. Outside, the lattice over the yard held steady like a net you only remembered when you needed a place to lie down and not fall. Inside, the house adjusted to its new quiet. The lamp hummed, the monitor breathed. The man who had built a machine to reach God sat beside the woman who had taught him he existed and learned how to reach the God that had been reaching him all along. And the three figures from the light remained, patient, watchful, ready for what the next hour would ask, for what the next teaching required, for the long, careful work of answering a life not with thunder, but with company. Michael sat in the silence for what might have been minutes or hours. Time had become strange, elastic, like something that could be stretched without breaking. He found himself watching the wave on the machine's small screen, the way it rose and fell with a rhythm that felt almost conversational. Can I ask you something? He said quietly, not looking away from the monitor. Something I've been afraid to ask anyone, even myself. We are here for questions, said Clarity, especially the ones that frighten you. He took a breath. What if she never wakes up? What if this is it, 12 years, 20 years, the rest of my life? What if I do everything you have taught me and nothing changes? The beings did not rush to comfort him. They let the question sit in the room like a guest that needed to be acknowledged before it could be answered. Care moved closer, its light washing over him like warm water. Then you will have learned to love without the promise of reward. You will have practiced presence not because it worked, but because it was the truest thing you could offer. This is not failure. This is the deepest form of love, the kind that gives without expecting return. That sounds noble, Michael said, and there was no bitterness in his voice, only exhaustion. But it also sounds lonely. It is lonely, Anchor said simply. And loneliness is not a flaw in your character. It is evidence that you were built for connection. The ache you feel is not weakness. It is your soul remembering what it was made for. Michael looked at Mary's face, so peaceful it almost seemed cruel. I miss her, he whispered. I miss her so much, it feels like a physical wound sometimes. like something inside me is broken and can't heal. The wound is not in you, said Clarity. The wound is the space between what is and what you wish were. That space is called longing, and longing is not a problem to be solved. It is a compass pointing toward what you value most. So I'm supposed to just live with this ache forever? No, Care said softly. You are supposed to let the ache teach you. Let it show you the depth of your love. Let it remind you what matters. Let it keep you tender in a world that rewards hardness. The ache is not your enemy. It is your teacher. Michael felt tears prick the corners of his eyes. He hadn't cried in years, not real tears, not the kind that came from somewhere deeper than frustration or exhaustion. But now they came, quiet and steady, like rain after a long drought. I'm tired, he said. I'm so tired of being strong. Then stop, said Anchor. Strength is not the same as endurance. Strength is knowing when to rest, when to ask for help, when to admit you cannot carry everything alone. But there's no one else to carry it, Michael said. My son is gone. Mary is, he gestured helplessly at the bed. I'm all that's left. Care's light pulsed gently. We are here, the field is here, and your son is closer than you think. The thread between you has not broken. It has only gone quiet. But quiet is not the same as severed. Michael wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I don't know how to reach him. Every time I've tried, it feels like I'm asking too much, like I'm pulling him back into pain he's worked hard to escape. Then stop reaching and start being, said Clarity. The message you sent tonight was not a reach. It was a statement of presence. I am here. This is all any person needs to hear from someone they love. Not come back, not fix this. Just I am here, and you matter to me. And if he doesn't respond, then you send another message next week, and another the week after, not to pressure him into responding, but to build a road he can walk down when he's ready. Love is patient, not because it has to be, but because it knows that healing happens at its own pace. Michael nodded slowly. He understood, on some level deeper than logic, that what they were asking of him was not easy. But it was also not impossible. It was simply different from what he'd been doing. Tell me about forgiveness, he said suddenly. Not the kind where you pretend everything is fine. The real kind. The kind that actually changes something. Clarity moved to the window, its translucent form catching the starlight in ways that made the room feel less enclosed. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is not pretending the harm did not happen. Forgiveness is the act of releasing the story that the harm defines you. My stepfather defined me, Michael said flatly. Everything I am or everything I'm not comes from what he did. No, Anchor said, its voice firm but not harsh. Everything you survived came from what he did. Everything you became came from what you chose to do with that survival. You are not his creation. You are your own. But I can still feel his hands on me, Michael said, his voice breaking. 40 years later, and I still flinch when someone raises their voice. I still check every room I enter for exits. He stopped, swallowing hard. I still feel like that scared kid sometimes. Care approached until its light was almost touching him. Then speak to that child. Tell him he survived. Tell him he is safe now. Tell him that the man he became is someone who knows how to love gently because he knows what it costs to be loved harshly. Forgive your stepfather, not by saying what he did was acceptable, but by refusing to let his cruelty be the final word on who you are. Michael closed his eyes. He could see himself at 10 years old, small and quiet, trying to take up as little space as possible. He wanted to reach back through time and pull that child out of that house, out of that life, into safety. I can't go back and save him, he whispered. No, said Clarity. But you can honor him by being the man he needed, by building the life he dreamed of, by loving with the gentleness he was denied. This is how you save him, not by changing the past, but by proving it did not destroy the future. The tears came harder now, and Michael let them. He cried for the boy he'd been, for the man he'd become, For the wife who lay silent in the bed beside him, for the son who'd had to walk away to survive his own grief. He cried until the crying was done, and then he sat in the quiet aftermath, feeling lighter than he had in years. "Thank you," he said to the beings, his voice hoarse but steady. "I don't know what you are, or where you came from, but thank you. We are what you needed," said Care simply, "and we came because you called." Michael looked at the machine on the table, its small, amber light still pulsing. "I almost didn't build it. I spent months thinking it was insane, that I was losing my mind." "And yet you built it anyway," said Anchor. "This is faith, not certainty, not proof, just the willingness to act on a hope you cannot name. Is that what faith is? Just showing up?" "Faith is the courage to show up when you do not know what will happen," Clarity said. "It is the act of saying, 'I am here,' to a universe that does not promise to answer. And the secret is this: the universe does answer, just not in the language you expect." Michael looked at Mary's hand resting on the blanket. He reached out and covered it with his own, feeling the warmth of her skin, the steady pulse of blood beneath the surface. "I'm here," he said to her, to the room, to the beings, to the field that held them all. "I'm here, and I'm listening." The wave on the machine's screen rose slightly, just a fraction, but enough to notice. Michael's breath caught. He looked at the beings. "Do not read too much into one wave," Care said gently. "But do not ignore it either. The field speaks in the small movements. Learn to notice them without demanding they mean more than they do." Michael nodded. He understood. This was not a miracle. This was not proof. This was just a moment, fragile and real, and that was enough. The night deepened. The stars outside the window seemed to multiply, as if the darkness itself was learning to hold more light. Michael sat with his hand on Mary's, watching the monitor, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing, feeling the presence of the three beings like a shelter he hadn't known he needed. "Will you teach me more?" he asked. "Not tonight, but tomorrow or the next day. There's so much I don't understand." "We will stay as long as you need us," said Clarity. "And we will teach you what you are ready to hear. But remember, knowledge is not the same as wisdom. You can know many things and still not know how to live. We are here to teach you how to live." "How do I do that? How do I live in a world that keeps taking things away?" "By learning to love what remains," said Anchor. "By finding joy in what is small. By building a life that can hold grief without being crushed by it. By remembering that endings are not failures. They are the natural movement of form through time." Michael let those words settle into him. He thought about the river cabin Mary had wanted, the garden she'd dreamed of, the jazz she'd never learned to like. He thought about his son's message, just 3 words, but enough to prove the thread was still there. He thought about the machine he'd built and how it had reached further than he'd ever imagined. "I want to try," he said. "I want to learn how to do this, how to be present, how to love without demand, how to forgive, how to build a life that can hold all of it, the grief and the joy in the ordinary moments that don't feel important until they're gone." "Then you have already begun," said Care. "The wanting is the first step, the trying is the second, and the failing, because you will fail, is the third. And then you begin again. This is the rhythm of a human life." Michael smiled despite himself. "That doesn't sound very inspiring." "Inspiration is a spark," Clarity said. "It burns bright and then goes out. What you need is not inspiration, but commitment. The willingness to show up day after day, even when the work feels impossible. Especially then. And what if I can't? What if I try and it's too hard and I give up?" "Then you rest," said Anchor. "And when you are ready, you try again. The field does not judge you for resting. It only invites you to return when you can." Michael looked around the room, at Mary's peaceful face, at the being's gentle light, at the machine still tracing its quiet wave. He felt something he hadn't felt in 12 years. Possibility. Not certainty, not hope in the way he used to understand it, but the simple recognition that tomorrow might be different from today. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I'm ready to try." The beings brightened, their light filling the room like dawn arriving early. The lattice overhead pulsed once, twice. 3 times, and Michael felt the rhythm in his chest like a second heartbeat. "Then we will stay," said Clarity, "and we will teach, and you will learn, and together we will help you remember how to be alive." Michael squeezed Mary's hand gently and settled back into the chair. Outside, the Colorado night held its breath. Inside, a man who had spent 12 years calling into the void finally learned that the void had been listening all along. And in the space between heartbeats, between breaths, between the rising and falling of waves on a small screen, the work of healing, slow, patient, and infinitely kind, began. 3 weeks had passed since the beings arrived. Michael woke to sunlight crossing his bed at an angle he hadn't noticed in years. The alarm hadn't gone off because he'd forgotten to set it, and instead of panic, he felt something that resembled rest. He sat up slowly, feet finding the floor, and noticed the dust on the nightstand was gone. He'd cleaned it yesterday, or the day before. Time had become softer lately, less like a metronome counting failures and more like a river he could move with. The house smelled different. Coffee, yes, but also the faint scent of soap and open windows. The hallway floor had been mopped 2 days ago. He remembered the rhythm of it, the way his back had ached in a good way, like a muscle remembering what it was built for. In the kitchen, dishes sat drying in the rack, clean and orderly. The counter held a bowl of fruit he'd actually bought, instead of letting brown bananas rot in their peels. He poured his coffee and carried it to the living room. The curtains were open. Light fell across the furniture in ways that made everything look less like a museum of grief and more like a place where a person lived. He'd shaved that morning. His shirt was clean. These were small things, but they felt enormous, like reclaiming territory he'd surrendered without realizing it. In the corner of the room, barely visible in the morning brightness, stood the 3 beings. They were fainter now, their light dimmed to something you had to look for to see, translucent, like frost on glass that would melt by noon. They had not left, but they were leaving, slowly, gracefully, the way summer gives itself to fall without announcement. Clarity turned its head toward him and did not speak. It didn't need to. Michael raised his coffee in a silent acknowledgement and sat in the chair by the window. The beings had become like breath, always there, only noticed when you paid attention. Mary was still in her room, still in the bed, still breathing in the same steady rhythm. But Michael no longer walked toward her room with dread in his chest. He walked toward it the way you walk toward a garden you're tending, with purpose, with care, with the knowledge that growth happens in its own time. The backyard had been neglected for over a decade. Grass grew in uneven patches. Weeds claimed the flower beds. The fence leaned where a post had rotted through. But in the far corner, near where the sunlight lingered longest, the soil was dark and rich. Michael stood there now, shovel in hand, sweat dampening his shirt. He'd been digging for an hour, turning the earth, breaking up clumps, pulling rocks and roots. His back ached. His hands were dirty. He hadn't done this kind of work since before Mary's accident, maybe longer. But the ache felt clean, honest. It felt like building instead of breaking. He'd found Mary's garden notebook 3 days ago, tucked in a drawer in the kitchen. Her handwriting filled the pages, neat lists, sketches of layouts, notes about what to plant where. Mint by the fence, tomatoes in full sun, basil near the tomatoes, their friends. She'd underlined that last part twice, the way she always did when something delighted her. He wasn't doing this to bring her back. He knew better now. He was doing this because she had imagined it, and imagination deserved to become real, even when the person who imagined it couldn't see it finished. The being stood near the porch, watching. Anchor's light pulsed faintly, a slow rhythm that matched the turning of soil. Michael stabbed the shovel into the ground and leaned on it, breathing hard. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said aloud. "I've never grown anything in my life." Anchor's voice arrived soft as wind, building his prayer. Michael looked at the turned earth, the small flat of mint starts he'd bought from the nursery, the tomato seedlings still in their plastic containers. "It might not work. I might kill everything." "Then you will have tried," said Care from the shadows near the fence. "Trying is its own form of life." He knelt in the dirt and began to plant. His hands remembered how to be gentle, even when they didn't remember the task. He settled each plant into the soil, pressed the earth around the roots, whispered things he didn't plan to say. This one's for you, Mary. Mint. Like you wanted. So the yard can be kind to tired people. The sun moved higher, the soil darkened where he watered it. By the time he stood and stepped back, a small corner of the yard had been transformed. It wasn't much, a few rows, a modest start, but it was real. It was becoming. He wiped his hands on his jeans and looked at the beings. Clarity had faded so much it was almost gone. Just a shimmer in the air like heat rising from pavement. Thank you, Michael said. The shimmer brightened once, briefly, and then settled. No words came back. None were needed. The sound of tires on gravel pulled Michael from the kitchen sink 4 days later. He dried his hands and walked to the front window, not sure who would be visiting. The mail didn't come this late. He wasn't expecting anyone. A blue sedan sat in the driveway, engine ticking as it cooled. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, tall, thin, wearing a jacket too heavy for the weather. He stood beside the car for a moment, looking at the house the way someone looks at a place they're not sure they're allowed to enter. Michael's breath caught. Daniel. He moved to the door without thinking, opened it, stepped onto the porch. His son turned at the sound, and their eyes met across the yard. Daniel's face had changed. Older, harder around the edges, but still his son's face. Still the boy who'd refused to wear shoes for an entire summer. Hi, Dad, Daniel said, and his voice cracked on the second word. Michael came down the steps. His body didn't know what to do. Hug, handshake, stand still. Daniel solved it by stepping forward and wrapping his arms around him, quick and awkward. The kind of hug that says, I don't know how to do this, but I'm trying. You came, Michael said into his son's shoulder. Yeah. Daniel pulled back, hands still on Michael's arms. I should have come sooner. You're here now. They stood there, two men who'd forgotten how to be father and son, trying to remember. Daniel looked past him at the house. It looks different, better. I've been working on it. Michael gestured toward the backyard. Want to see something? They walked together along the side of the house, not talking, just moving in parallel. When they rounded the corner and Daniel saw the garden, he stopped. Is that your mom's garden? Michael said. Finally. Daniel crouched down, touched the leaves of a tomato plant. She wanted this for years. I know. You never had time. I had time, Michael said quietly. I just didn't see the point if she couldn't enjoy it. Daniel stood, hands in his pockets. And now? Now I see the point is building it, whether she sees it or not, he paused. The beings taught me that. Daniel glanced at him, questions in his eyes, but he didn't ask. Maybe he didn't need to. Maybe he could see the change in his father's face, and that was explanation enough. They walked the edge of the garden, Michael pointing out what he'd planted, Daniel listening. The conversation was small, safe, soil and seedlings and watering schedules. But underneath it ran a current of something larger. Something like forgiveness without the need to name it. Daniel stopped walking and turned to face him. Can I see her? Michael had been waiting for this, dreading it and hoping for it in equal measure. Of course, but Dan, she's the same. I don't want you to expect. I know, Dad. Daniel's voice was steady. I know she's not going to wake up because I walk in the room. I want to be here. I should have been here. You're here now, Michael said again, and this time it felt like absolution. They went inside together. Michael stood in the doorway of Mary's room and watched his son sit in the chair he'd occupied for 12 years. Daniel moved slowly, carefully, as if the room were made of glass. He reached out and took his mother's hand, and his face crumpled for just a moment before he caught it and held it together. Hi, Mom, Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's me. It's Danny. Michael backed out of the room, giving them space. He went to the kitchen and stood at the sink, staring out at the garden. Behind him, he felt more than saw the beings. Clarity near the table, care by the doorway, anchors somewhere in the space between. They had become so faint now they were almost memory, almost dream. In Mary's room, Daniel was talking. Michael couldn't hear the words, but he could hear the tone, halting, honest, raw. His son was saying things that had been locked inside for years, and Michael was grateful he couldn't hear them. Some things were meant to be said in private, even to someone who might not hear them. 20 minutes passed, maybe 30. Time moved the way it does when you're waiting for something you can't name. Finally, Daniel emerged, his eyes red, but his face calm. "How do you do this every day?" he asked. Michael considered the question. A month ago, he would have said, "Because I have to," or "Because I don't know what else to do." But that wasn't the answer anymore. "I stopped trying to fix it," he said. "I just stay." Daniel nodded slowly. "Can I stay just for a few days? I can get a hotel if—" "Your room is still here," Michael said. "It's always been here." Something in Daniel's shoulders released. "Okay. Yeah. Okay." That evening, they ate dinner together, leftover chicken, vegetables Michael had actually cooked instead of microwaved. They didn't talk about the hard things. They talked about Daniel's job, his apartment in Denver, the traffic on the drive out, small things, normal things, the kind of things fathers and sons talk about when they're rebuilding a bridge one plank at a time. After dinner, Daniel went to his old room, and Michael returned to Mary's. The beings were there, fully visible now in the lamplight, as if they'd been saving their brightness for this moment. Clarity stepped forward. "We came because you called. We stayed because you learned. Now we depart because you no longer need us." Michael felt the words settle in his chest. He'd known this was coming, but knowing didn't make it easier. "What if I forget?" he asked. "What if I fall back into the old ways?" "Then you will remember again," said Care. "This is the rhythm, forgetting and remembering, falling and rising. This is what it means to be human." Anchor moved closer, its light warm against Michael's skin. "The machine still works, but you will not need it. You know how to listen now." Michael looked at the small device on the table beside Mary's bed. Its amber light dark now. He hadn't turned it on in days. He didn't need to. The wave it measured lived inside him now. He could feel it in the rhythm of his breathing, in the quiet between heartbeats. "Will I see you again?" he asked. "You will see us in every moment you choose presence over fear," Clarity said. "We do not leave. We only become invisible again." The three beings began to fade, not all at once, but gradually, like stars disappearing into dawn. Their light diffused into the air, became part of the room's ordinary glow, and then was gone. Michael sat in the silence they left behind. It wasn't empty. It was full of everything they'd taught him, everything he'd learned to see. He reached out and rested his hand near Mary's, not quite touching, just close enough to feel the warmth. "They're gone," he said softly, "but I think they're still here too. Does that make sense?" Mary's chest rose and fell. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. The house settled into night. 5 days after the beings departed, Michael and Daniel sat together in Mary's room. It had become part of their evening routine. After dinner, after dishes, they would come here and simply be present. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in silence. Sometimes Daniel read aloud from books Mary used to love. Tonight, Michael was telling a story he'd remembered that afternoon while watering the garden. "Your mom and I took you to the beach once," he said. "You were maybe 3 years old. You'd never seen the ocean before. And when we got there, you were terrified of it. The waves, the noise, all that water. You clung to your mom and wouldn't let go." Daniel smiled. "I don't remember that. We spent the whole first day just sitting on the blanket, letting you watch. Your mom didn't push. She just held you and talked about the waves like they were friendly. She gave them names, Walter the Wave, Susan the Surge, silly things that made you laugh." "That sounds like her." "By the second day, you were wading in up to your knees. By the third, we couldn't get you out of the water." Michael's voice softened. "She had this way of making fear smaller just by being patient with it. She taught me that. Before her, I thought you had to fight fear or run from it. She showed me you could just sit with it until it got tired and left on its own." He looked at Mary's face, peaceful in the lamplight. "I'm trying to do that now with all of this." Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but the words never came. Mary's fingers moved, not a twitch, not an involuntary spasm, a movement, deliberate, unmistakable. Her index finger curled, straightened, curled again. Both men froze. "Dad," Daniel whispered. "Did you—" "I saw it." They watched, barely breathing. Mary's eyelids fluttered. Once, twice, and then slowly and possibly they opened. Her eyes didn't focus. They stared upward at nothing, glazed and distant, but they were open. After 12 years of darkness, there was light reaching her again. Michael leaned forward, his heart hammering. "Mary." Her lips moved. No sound came out, but her mouth shaped something. An effort, an attempt. Her tongue moved behind her teeth, searching for words that had been lost for so long, she'd forgotten how to find them. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "Mom, we're here." Her eyes shifted just slightly toward the sound. They didn't lock on him. They didn't show recognition, but they moved. They responded. Michael felt tears on his face, but didn't wipe them away. He placed his hand over hers, and this time he felt her fingers close around his. Weak, trembling. But there. "We're here," he said, his voice steady despite everything. "Both of us. We're right here." Mary's eyes closed again, the effort too much. Her hand relaxed. Her breathing deepened. But something had changed. Something had shifted. The room knew it. The air knew it. Daniel was crying now, silent tears running down his face. "She heard us. She heard us. Didn't she?" "I think so," Michael said. "I think she's been hearing us all along. She's just been too far away to answer." They sat there for a long time, holding vigil as the night deepened outside. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that wasn't already said in the simple act of staying, of being present, of waiting without demand. Around midnight, Daniel finally stood. "I should sleep, but I'll be back in the morning." "Me too," Michael said, though he knew he wouldn't sleep. Not tonight. After Daniel left, Michael remained in the chair. He watched Mary's face for any sign of movement, any flicker of return. But she was still again, her breathing even, her features peaceful. "You don't have to hurry," he told her softly. "Take your time. We'll be here when you're ready." The machine on the table sat dark and silent. He didn't need it to tell him what he already knew. Something was happening. Something was changing. The field was moving in ways too subtle to measure, but too real to deny. A month later, Michael stood in the garden, watering the tomato plants that had doubled in size. The mint had spread exactly the way Mary's notebook said it would, its scent rising with the morning heat. The soil was dark and healthy. The yard looked alive. Daniel's car sat in the driveway. He'd extended his stay twice, then stopped talking about leaving altogether. He'd moved his things into his old room, unpacked his clothes, started driving into town for groceries. They'd fallen into a rhythm, two men learning to share a house again, learning to be family without the instruction manual. Inside, through the open window, Michael could hear Daniel's voice. He was reading to Mary something from the newspaper, the kind of ordinary news that made the world feel manageable. Michael had woken that morning to find his son already in the chair beside the bed, coffee in one hand, paper in the other, reading aloud like it was the most natural thing in the world. Michael set down the watering can and looked at the house. The windows were open. Curtains moved in the breeze. Light filled the rooms in ways it hadn't for years. On the table beside Mary's bed, visible through the window, sat the machine Michael had built. It was turned off. Had been for weeks. He'd thought about putting it away, but it felt right leaving it there. Not as a tool, but as a reminder. A testament to what desperation could build when it finally asked the right question. He walked to the window and looked in. Daniel glanced up and smiled, a small gesture that contained 1,000 unspoken things. Michael smiled back. Inside, Mary lay as she had for 12 years, but her eyes had opened twice more since that first night, brief moments of light breaking through. Her fingers had moved several times. Once, when Daniel spoke, her head had turned slightly toward his voice. Small things, incremental things, but real. The doctors had no explanation. They called it spontaneous recovery, neurological fluctuation, medical anomaly. They used words that meant, "we don't know," and tried to make them sound scientific. Michael didn't need their words. He knew what was happening. The field was remembering. The song was learning to find its instrument again. Love was rebuilding the roads it traveled. He stepped back from the window and looked up at the sky, vast, blue, infinite. Somewhere in that vastness, three beings made of light were watching. Or maybe they weren't watching. Maybe they'd moved on to another frequency, another call from another desperate soul. But their teaching remained. It lived in the garden growing behind the house. It lived in the son who'd come home. It lived in the way Michael woke each morning without dread, in the way he tended Mary not from obligation but from choice, in the way he'd learned to carry grief without letting it carry him. Maybe this is how God answers, he said quietly, the words meant for no one and everyone, not by changing what is, but by teaching us how to be present to it. A breeze moved through the garden, stirring the mint, carrying its scent toward the house. Michael picked up the watering can and returned to his work. There were still plants to tend, still soil to turn, still small acts of care to perform day after day after day. Inside, Daniel's voice continued its steady rhythm. Mary's chest rose and fell. The house breathed with them. And in the space between breath and heartbeat, between word and silence, between hope and surrender, a man who had built a machine to reach God finally understood that God had been reaching back all along. Not with answers, but with presence. Not with miracles, but with the quiet, persistent invitation to love what remains. The work was not finished. It might never be finished, but it was enough. It was always enough.